Sorry. I'll raise my hand. I was responsible.
But you follow directions well, Richard.
Just be glad she doesn't have an eraser.
I've been hit there before.
Vince Mohr is our guest today to share his presentation, motivational presentation with us. He's been with Great Western in the past, as you've recommended before. We do have a couple guests of his, if you could introduce.
Yeah, this is my parents, Rick and Suzanne Mohr.
The
Right.
video expert here.
Camera crew.
First time.
So let's give Vince a good welcome and thank you for
Hey. Thank you very much, and I'm very proud to be here this afternoon. Not only because I get the opportunity to share with some of the managers of one of the most profitable financial institutions in the country, but also because I get to share with my family and some friends, Carol, Lee, Sue, Dale, many of them up from our way, and so I'm really honored to be here, and thank you very much. I'm not here really this afternoon, though, to preach to you or lecture to you. I'm just here to share with you a little bit of my philosophy and my belief. I'm not very smart, I'm not very intelligent, and I try and keep things real simple. My parents always roused me. I graduated from Camarillo High School in 1979, Ann's new stomping grounds, and I graduated 475 of our graduating class of 613. And that didn't bother me too much, but it did rather upset me when our principal said it was a rather stupid class overall. I remember talking to one of my teachers, Mr. McEwen, and we were chatting one day, and he asked me if I was going to become a laborer or go into service, and I said, no, sir. I'm going to go up and go to school at Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo. And he said, well, you'll flunk out. And I said, you don't think I'm very smart, do you, Mr. McEwen? And I'll never forget what he said. He said, well, Vince Mohr, there's a lot of kids that don't know what's going on, but you don't even suspect anything's going on. And he wasn't too far from the truth. It only took me 5 years to get out of Cuesta College, which is our junior college up there. So my parents didn't even realize that partying was a major. So that'll give you a little general tally of my background. So anyways, the presentation's entitled Triangle of Success. And the funny thing, or the nice thing about success, is it really has nothing to do with looks and intelligence. It really has nothing to do with fame and fortune. Success has to do with how we deal with it as individuals and how we deal with it in our personal lives. So there's hope for me. But the way I came up with the triangle is anytime I hear a good idea, I read a good book, and Lee is excellent. He's got an entire library of books and tapes. And anytime I'm going through that info and there's a good idea that I want to remember, I just incorporate it into the presentation that we're going to go over here this afternoon. So it's nothing that you haven't heard. It's just the way that I remember it, and hopefully I can share with you where you can remember it. So when you hear a good idea, you can relate it into one of these sides. The first side of the triangle has to do with attitude. And attitude really determines everything in life. William James, the father of psychology from the University of Harvard, once said, you can change your life if you'll alter your attitudes of mind. So attitude's pretty important to the triangle, success triangle. What I'd like to do is share a couple of stories, though, of how attitude relates to my life. When I was a young man back in 1985 and 86, I had the opportunity to work with Home Savings of America as a loan agent. And at the time, it was at the height of the refinance boom, and things were just had busted loose back then. And I was making as much money in a month as I was used to making in a year. I was living in my hometown. I was married to the woman of my dreams. We had 2 beautiful babies. I had 2 brand new cars, a house, rentals, sailboat. I was pretty successful by most people's terms. But when I look back on that time in my life, and when my family we look back on that time of in our lives, it's pretty gray. And that's the one thing about attitude, is how much it affects the people around you. So conversely, a few years later, I had the opportunity to go and work with Great Western Bank up in the Seattle, Washington area, out of the Linwood office. And when I had left to go to Seattle, my home in San Luis Obispo was in escrow. So I thought I could sell, and I had the capital to work with, pay off my bills, and we were going to start all over. Well, I got up there, and my home fell out of escrow. The tract that I live in, the builder had to auction the remaining homes off. So I'm in a new area, a big area compared to SLO by comparison. I was without my family, working on a commission job, way undercapitalized, and I just said to myself, well, I really need to make the best of this. So what I did is I borrowed some money from a grandmother who had recently passed away. Got my family up there. My parents helped out. And basically, I just made the best of it. And I met with the loan manager up there, and I said, you know, a gentleman by the name of Dan Cody. And I said, you know, Dan, we can really do some things up here in this area. And so we started having monthly sales meetings. I got together with Steve Largent, the great football player from the Seattle Seahawks, and we put together it was going to be a real estate event that he was going to come share at. Great Western was going to host it. Things really started jiving. And within a couple of months, we were the highest producing office for Great Western Bank outside of the state of California. But that really wasn't a loan agent's victory. It had nothing to do with my volume or anything like that. It just had to do with having people look at things a little differently, to tweak their attitude a bit. And I remember when I left the Seattle area, Dan said, you know, he said, I just want to thank you for one thing, and that is for your attitude. So that's when it hit me, you know, upside the head, that attitude's pretty important, and I did make the best of it, of that situation. And ironically, or the irony of these two stories is a period of time in my life when I should have been happy because I was and my attitude should have been great because I was extremely successful. I was quite miserable because of the attitude, and yet on the other hand, at a period of time in my life when I should have been quite miserable because things looked pretty bleak, I have to say it was one of the most rewarding experiences that I've ever had. I mentioned to Lee right before we started, I'm now with United Savings Bank, and I'm happy to be with them, but I've always loved working with Home and Great Western because I love being around successful people such as yourselves, because you've chose to be successful. You know, God gave us all the power to think, to love, to create, to imagine, to plan. But the greatest power we have, ladies and gentlemen, is the power to choose. We can choose to act or procrastinate, believe or doubt, help or heal, pray or curse. But we also choose whether we're going to succeed or whether we're going to fail. And the first question everybody asks is, well, why doesn't everybody choose success? And I don't care if you happen to be a homemaker, a loan agent, a manager, a CEO, our choices determine our success. And the reason that everybody doesn't choose it is because of adversity, because of failure. I've personally been on top and I've been on bottom, and I know I'm going to be both places again. And if this country was built with some pretty successful people in it, and if you read biographies, the one thing you walk away from is that these people had failed a lot, went through a lot of adversity, a lot of failures. Babe Ruth struck out more than anybody that ever played the game of baseball. Helen Keller was deaf, dumb, and blind. Thomas Edison had literally thousands and thousands of failures. Abraham Lincoln had a nervous breakdown. And the list goes on. And that's the same with you and me. It's just, that's why our attitude, though, is so important, because we are going to have a lot of adversity. We're going to have a lot of failure along the way. And if you're having a tough time visualizing when I talk about attitude, I think you can take the Magic Johnson story and look how he's handled his set of circumstances. Most of us would say Irvin Magic Johnson was a winner on the basketball floor. But I think most of us, since what's happened to him, have come to realize that he's a winner in life because of his attitude. And a poem I'd like to share with you before we leave this side of the triangle, it was written by Charles Swindoll, the great lecturer and pastor from the Orange County. And it goes like this. It's entitled Attitude. And it goes, the longer I live, the more I realize the impact of attitude on life. Attitude to me is more important than facts. It is more important than past, than education, than money, than circumstances, than failures, than successes, than what other people will think, say, or do. It is more important than appearance, than giftedness or skill. It will make or break a company, a church, or a home. The remarkable thing is we all have a choice every day regarding the attitude that we will embrace for that day. We cannot change our past. We cannot change the fact that people are going to act in a certain way. All we can change is we cannot change the inevitable. The only thing we can do is play on the string that we have, and that is our attitude. And I am convinced that life is 10% of what happens to me and 90% of the way I react to it. And so it is with you. We're all in charge of our attitudes. The next side of the triangle has to do with goals. I'm really impressed with goals, and everybody's always talking about the goals, and UCLA's been doing a human behavioral study in this country for 50 some odd years now, and they've been studying the wealthiest, most successful, highly motivated, well-rounded individuals in this country, and they've determined one thread with all those individuals, and that is that they all set goals in their lives. The bad news is that they've also determined that less than 5% of Americans set goals. And I think goals are so important to the success triangle, because if you look up success in any dictionary, it always reads the same way: a progressive realization of a worthwhile goal or dream. A progressive realization of a worthwhile goal or dream. So I guess the opposite of that, or conversely, you cannot be successful unless you have goals and you have dreams. And the nice thing about goals, or the exciting thing, is we get to decide what areas in our lives we want to have goals, whether it's spiritually, mentally, professionally, socially, family. We get to decide. That's the exciting thing about this country, is we get to choose. But a couple things about goals that have to be there. And the first is that they have to be written. From the time we're born till the time we die, everything that we're committed to in this life is in writing. Our birth certificates are in writing. Our marriage certificates are in writing. The notes, the deeds to our homes are all in writing. So the first thing about goals is they've got to be written. Because if they're written, you'll believe you're going to achieve them and you'll be committed to them. Next thing is that they have to be planned. You know, the old little cliche, most people don't plan to fail, they just fail to plan. More people will plan for a trip, a vacation, for a party. More people will plan for a trip to the grocery store than they do, than they will plan in their own lives. So your goals, they have to be planned. The next thing is that they have to be visualized. They call that the first birth, or in the Bible, in Mark 9:23, it says, whatever the mind can conceive and believe, it will achieve. So they have, you have to visualize. I mean, the nice thing is that your mind does not know the difference between make-believe and reality. So if you can visualize something and you see yourself attaining your goals, your mind doesn't know the difference if that's real or fake or make-believe. The last thing is you have to be persistent. And persistence is the glue or the key to anything in life. It really is. And a few years ago, quite a few years ago now, but Calvin Coolidge wrote a poem entitled Press On, and I'd like to share it with you. Nothing in the world can take the place of persistence. Talent will not. Nothing is more common than an unsuccessful man with talent. Genius will not. Unrewarded genius is almost a proverb. Education will not. The world is full of educated derelicts. Only persistence and a commitment will ensure your success. So you have to be persistent with your goals. I follow Lou Holtz a lot, the head football coach at the University of Notre Dame, and Lou's endorsed my presentation. As a matter of fact, he's been kind enough to preview it and give me an endorsement. And I don't know if you know anything about Lou Holtz, but he's probably the greatest collegiate coach, period, at the intercollegiate level these days. And Lou's a man that stands 5 feet 10 inches, weighs 152 pounds, wears glasses, speaks with a lisp, and has a physique that looks like he's been inflicted with beriberi and scurvy most of his life. But the one thing about Lou, and the reason he can stand up as the head football coach at the University of Notre Dame, is he's very adamant about goals. And he one time read the book The Magic of Thinking Big by David Schwartz. And in there it listed all the things we needed to do. You need to plan them, you need to write them, etc. So he gets excited, and in 1966, he was unemployed. There was a coaching change, and he was out of a job. His wife was 9 months pregnant, or can't be 9 months, I guess. So 7, 8 months pregnant with their third child. And he sat down and he listed all the things he wanted to do in life. He wanted to float the Snake River, land in the aircraft carrier, eat at the White House, be on the Tonight Show, win the national championship, coach in Notre Dame. It goes on and on. There's 107 of these suckers, and he's unemployed. And he goes to his wife and he says, look at honey, 107 of these suckers, and we're going to do every last one of them. She said, well, that's nice, Lou. He said, but why don't you, she said, why don't you add one more? And he said, well, what's that? She said, why don't you get a job? So the list became 108. And he's done almost each and every one of those. I believe he's up to like 98 last count that I had heard. So, but we all know what goals and dreams are about. As kids, we fantasize about the things we want to do, the things we want to become, the places we want to go. And then formal education sets in, failure sets in, and those goals and those dreams basically just start to diminish. And as a child, my mother and stepfather, we lived up in the San Francisco Bay Area, and they had season tickets to what at that time were the Oakland Raiders. And as a kid, a long time ago, I decided that I wanted to own the Raiders. And as an adult, that was a dream, and now that's a goal of mine. And most people laugh or chuckle when I tell them I want to own the Raiders. But I had a sobering experience a couple weeks ago. I was having lunch with a gal by the name of Clara Katursky. And at one time, Clara was the #1 selling real estate agent for Century 21 in America. And now she's a multi-millionaire, and she builds shopping centers and stadiums, and as a hobby she builds down in Westlake, she builds multi-million-dollar homes as a hobby. But we were having lunch, and I told Clara about this school, and she didn't bat an eyelash. And as we continue to speak, come to find out, Clara grew up as a Jew during World War II in Poland, and she and her family spent her childhood running from Hitler and the Nazis. So when I shared this goal with her, she didn't bat an eyelash, because all she knows about this country is that it stands for opportunity. And before we leave this side of the triangle, I'd like to just share another poem with you. And I got this from my grandfather, and my grandfather sold Cadillacs for Tom Williams Cadillac here in town. And in 1962, he was the #1 car salesman in the United States of America. And it goes like this: if you think you are beaten, you are. If you think you dare not, you don't. If you'd like to win but think you can't, it's almost certain you won't. If you think you'll lose, you're lost. For out of the world we find success begins with a fellow's will, and it's all a state of mind. Life's battles don't always go to the stronger or faster man, but sooner or later the man who wins is the man who thinks he can. The base of the triangle has to do with principles, and I don't think it's really fair for me to stand up here and inflict my own personal principles on you, but I guarantee there's 3 principles that every successful person lives by, and I'm sure it's the 3 principles that you live by. And so I'd like to share those with you. And the first one is to do what's right. Most of us know the difference between right and wrong. It's right to be honest, it's right to be loyal, it's right to be on time, and it goes on and on. But if you have a problem with right and wrong, I suggest just get out the Bible. I have a faith in the Lord, and I'm not going to make this a religious speech, but I don't know what the future holds. All I know is I do know who holds the future for me. And the only time I really get in trouble is when I do something I know is not the right thing in my heart. So number 1 is do what's right. The next principle is always give your best and don't ever accept anything less. Always give your best and don't ever accept anything less. If you think back to probably the most fruitful, the most rewarding times in your life, you'll probably realize that you were surrounded by people that would not accept less from you than the best that you were capable of giving. And at the time, you might have thought, well, it could have been a coach, it could have been a professor, a teacher, a boss, manager, etc. But if you think back, you'll probably find you were surrounded like people, around people like that, because they would not accept less from you than the best that you were capable of doing. And the interesting thing is, they don't care what you thought. You might have thought they were being mean to you or picking on you or didn't like you. They don't care, because people like that, if you give your best at everything you do, you have enough self-confidence that you're doing a service to your employees, to your children, to everybody around you. So always give your best and don't ever accept anything less. The third principle is known as the golden rule. Treat other people as you'd like to be treated. It's amazing how little incident can come back to haunt us or help us. Psychologists say if somebody is nice to you and is pleasant to you, you go out and tell the next 7, 8 people. But if you're rude to somebody and you offend somebody in any way, psychologists say that people will go out and tell the next 17 people. And they're usually not knocking the individual, they're knocking the entire organization. When I was in college, I used to work night crew for Lucky Stores in San Luis, and I did a lot of sleeping during class. So I got in the habit of using a dictaphone, where I just turned the thing on and I'd take a snooze. Maybe that's why it took me 6 years to get out of junior college. But I've been using one ever since. Some people have these little pads that they hang on their windshield or whatever. Well, I write it with a big hook, and I'd be all over the road. So I still use a dictaphone to this day. But a couple weeks ago, I dropped mine, and it fell. And seemed to work fine, except for when I went to record. And for a dictaphone, that's a pretty bad thing, not to record. So I purchased it when I was working up in the Monterey Peninsula area, but I took it into the local Longs there in San Luis, and I bumped into Cindy. And I told Cindy what had happened. I said, I'm so upset, and I've got my money out, and I'm ready to buy a new dictaphone. And I told her this sob story, and she goes, listen. She goes, if you'd be willing to get the same kind, I was going to purchase a different brand, I'd be willing to just do a swap with you. And I can't believe how many people that I've shared that story about Long's Drugstore in San Luis Obispo and Cindy in that story. So it's amazing. Every time I get up and speak, I'm sharing that story. It's amazing if you're kind to people, how it'll come back to reward you or haunt you. And why the reason that these 3 principles are so important to success and so important to life is because we all ask 3 universal questions of each other. Whether you're in the work atmosphere, the home atmosphere, we all ask 3 universal questions. And the first question that everybody asks is, can I trust you? You don't have any sort of a relationship, it's not based on trust. And boy, once you lose someone's trust, it's a tough thing to get back. As a loan agent, if you lose the trust of the real estate community, you might as well pack it in and hit the road, because it's a tough thing to get back. So the first question everybody asks is, can I trust you? The second question everybody asks is, are you committed to excellence? People want to be identified or aspire, to be the very best. And if you give the best in everything you do, that answers that question for people. Are you committed to excellence? I remember reading a quote one time about JFK. He was asked in 1960 if he would accept the vice presidency of the United States because he was young and he was a Catholic. And JFK's response was, nope. Once you accept second place when first is available, you have a tendency to do it the rest of your life. So if you give the best at everything you do, that answers that question. And the third principle is or question that they ask is, do you care about me? Do you care about me as a person and my problems, or do you care about me as an individual? You know, is it because I'm a good salesman, or I have a lot of contacts, or a lot of knowledge in your business, or do you care about me? And the three principles that we're talking about here, just to kind of help you out, is trust, commitment, and love. And I'd like to share one more poem with you, or another poem to kind of tie these all together. And it goes like this. I got this from Lou Holtz. And it goes, it's about the builder. I saw a group of men in my hometown. I saw a group of men tearing a building down. With a heave and a hoe and a mighty yell, they swung the beam and the sidewall fell. I said to the foreman, are these men skilled? The type you hire if you wanted to build? Well, he laughed and said, why, no, indeed, for common labor is all I need. For I can tear down in a day or two what it took a builder 10 years to do. And I thought to myself as I walked away, which of these roles am I going to play? Am I the type that constantly tears down as a make way fools see around? Or am I the type that's trying to build with care and hopes that my family or organization was glad I was there? To build anything takes trust, commitment, and love. And I know and again, you know, I haven't shared anything with you that you haven't heard. It all sounds maybe a little theoretical, a little ambiguous. So I'd like to just leave you with a few closing comments that might help you tie it all together. And the best way to get a triangle going, if you remember symmetrically, is turn it into a circle, and we do that by connecting the angles. So the first angles we want to connect is to get serious. You know, life is something to get serious about. What do we call it? Life or death? Success, failure, illness, health. You know, life is really something to get serious about. The caveat is that there's no neutral. There's no sitting on the fence. You got to decide what side of the fence you want to go on, because in life you're either growing or dying. The world's spinning all the time. So you need to get serious about your attitude, get serious about your goals, and get serious about your principles. The next angles we need to connect is to get smart. And I'm not talking about getting smart in the trivial things so you can go play on Jeopardy or something. I'm talking about getting smart in the areas that you deem important to you in your life. Because what do they say? Knowledge is power. Now, there's a couple cliches that I'd like to fix. And the first is, what you don't know will hurt you. And ignorance is not bliss. So you got to get smart. Get smart with your goals. Get smart with your principles. And get smart about your attitude. The last angles that we need to connect is to get started. That last statement that I just made was really false. Applied knowledge is what's powerful. You know, there's a law in the universe of gravity. If I take these pins and I drop them, the law of gravity says they're going to fall and hit the floor. In the physical realm, there's also the law of reciprocity. For every action, there's an opposite and equal or greater reaction. In the Bible, it's called sowing and reaping. And that law reads, if you go out and work, you will be rewarded. It's a law. It's just like these pins hitting the floor. There's no luck to it. There's no economy to it. There's no nothing. It works. But there's this gentleman who takes this farm that's just a wreck. I mean, it is just a wreck. And he, you know, it's overgrown and tires and junk, and it looks more like, resembles more like a junkyard than it does a farm. But he gets in there, rolls up the sleeves, turns all the soil over, grows these beautiful crops, has flowers, white picket fence, you know the scene, beautiful house, repaints it, etc. And his pastor's driving by one day. And his pastor stops and he says, you know, sir, the Lord has certainly blessed you with a beautiful farm. And the gentleman turned to his pastor and he says, you know what? You're absolutely right, and I would never take anything away from the Lord. But I just want to say you should have seen this place when he had it to himself. One last thought and one last poem and we're done. And the thought I get from my father, and I didn't even know my dad knew Shakespeare, but it goes in Hamlet. Polonius says, unto thy own self be true, for it must follow as the day to night, and then thou cannot speak false to any man. And I probably think that's probably the greatest gift that a person could give themselves, is just to be true and honest with yourself. Last poem I got, it's from a gentleman by the name of Rocky Covington, who played in the NFL and now is a bigwig with the Amway Corporation out of Ada, Michigan. It goes, God bless America, America the beautiful. May she always stay that way. But if we're to keep Old Glory flying, there's a price that we must pay. For everything worth having demands work and sacrifice, and freedom is a gift from God that commands the highest price. For all our work in progress would be as worthless as could be without the faith that made us great and set this nation free. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.